get ready to weather the storm with our very special guest today. We've got Rob Perillo, the Chief Meteorologist for KATC TV3's Acadiana News Channel, who's been forecasting Acadiana's weather for over 3 decades. Rob has become a true master of predicting the unpredictable. Join us as Rob shares his weather wisdom and some really amazing stories about his wild experiences in the world of meteorology. Thank you so much for being here. We're so grateful and honored to have you.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
It was funny because we ran into each other at Mardi Gras.
Mardi Gras, right.
And you were like the honorable king.
I don't know what I was doing. I was in a car at the beginning of the parade, waving and Mardi Gras is such a fun time.
Yeah.
The last couple of years, we missed it that COVID year. And,
right.
It's nice to get everybody out again and visiting because there are a lot of people that you haven't seen in 2 or 3 years all of a sudden.
That's right.
And it's kind of crazy. It came back strong. Maybe with a case or two of COVID in the family, everybody eventually gets it, it seems. But loving it.
It was such a pleasure to run into you. Thank you for doing this. I got to tell you, like my whole staff and everybody were so excited. I've never seen, we've never had somebody so famous here sitting in.
It's very, very local celebrity. It's just bounded by Johnston or whatever.
And we were just talking. I know you have a super busy schedule.
Yeah,
because and especially like during the summer when you have a hurricane,
right?
Then that's got to be chaotic. Plus your family, and everything.
Yes.
So anyway, so I'm gonna jump right into it.
Okay.
Man. So we really one of the first questions that I'm getting the most asked by our customers and clients is since 2016, we had this huge flood, right?
Right.
And then so we go right into the 2020, and we had last year we had another hurricane, and then Lake Charles got Laura, and it seems like we're getting hit more and more by storms. Is that a perception, or is that really happening?
Well, there has been a hyperactivity in the Gulf of Mexico. There's no doubt about it. You can start with the 2016 unnamed storm. They call it the unnamed storm, the flood that we had here from Baton Rouge to Loudoun. Huge, widespread flood. And we could talk more about that extensively. But then you got 2017, you had the Hurricane Harvey along the Texas coast that, went from a tropical depression to a Cat 4 in 44 hours. And then over the next 4 days, proceeded to deliver 50 to 60 inches of rain along the upper Texas coast through Beaumont. And then 2018, you had Category 5, Michael, first Cat 5 to hit the U.S. since Andrew. Very rarefied air. The damage there was incredible. 2019, we had a little storm here, but it was kind of weird. We had Hurricane Mary. That was pretty much a hurricane in St. Mary Parish, but not the rest of Acadiana. But we had action in 2019. Then, of course, Laura. In 2020, what was the other storm that hit east of us? That would have been Ida.
Ida, right.
And then Ian this past year. Fortunately, we did not get a sniff. And as long as not a sniff of a tropical atmosphere all last year, which was a blessing in disguise because we were moving and redoing the whole studio at KATC, moving the weather equipment, and it was scheduled for June and then July, and then it's going to be September. And we were fortunate that we didn't have any activity last year. And that's any year you can get by without a tropical disturbance is a big win for the area.
So I mean, do you see like a trend? Or should we be expecting more and more of this, or is it just a little bit different?
The trend, what we're observing, I mean, it boils down to the Gulf of Mexico is running about 3 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit hotter than the 20th century average. And again, tropical systems feed off of that tropical air mass. So we're seeing a number of things in the Gulf of Mexico at our latitude. And I've spent the time researching this and going through the data. But we're seeing not so much more storms. We did have a hyperactivity period, so we did have more frequent storms. We're not sure if we're going to see an uptick on the total number of storms, but what we're seeing in the Gulf is that the storms are intensifying much more quickly because of this warm extra warm background layer of the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah.
And we're seeing these storms going from, the ones I just mentioned, Harvey, Michael, Ian, Ida, Laura, all go from tropical depressions or storms to full-blown Cat 3, 4 hurricanes inside of a 36, 48-hour period. So we're having less time to react. It's not like you're seeing a storm coming in through the Caribbean and we've been tracking it for 10 days.
Right.
And here it is on our doorstep. We've been watching it. But these storms, sometimes the models don't even capture their development at this point because we're seeing these off-the-charts, what we call rapid intensification cycles, where the storms intensify. In 24 hours, they go up 30, 40 mile per hour in their sustained winds. So we're seeing more intense storms and more rapid intensification cycles. And at the same time, if you look at the background climate signal, things are moving slower across our latitude. So tropical systems are moving slower. So thus, we're seeing more rainfall and more damage from these storms than we might have expected for similar storms back, similar setups back in the 20th century, even the late 20th century. So we're not necessarily seeing more storms. If you look at the last 20 years, we're getting a hit every 3 to 5 years. That's bared out. It used to be every other storm was a major category 3 storm that hit somewhere on the Gulf of Mexico, in Louisiana, that developed in the Gulf of Mexico. Every other one is a Cat 3. That's the long-term average. Now every other one is closer to Cat 4, right? Yeah. And so you have that, and then because
that is a real thing. Like that is around our perception.
No, I mean it's a real thing. We're seeing more energy,
stronger storms hitting our coast.
Not only that, but we're seeing that energy carry further and further north. So you take New York or Boston, for example, their frequency of a major storm used to be once every 75 years.
I think it's Ida actually went up there.
Ida killed more people in the Northeast because of the flooding.
Yeah.
And that's the other key is that the moisture content, not only in hurricanes and tropical storms, but the 2016 flood, the moisture content values are so much higher than anything we experienced in my early part of my career that we're producing more intense rainfalls and they're occurring more frequently. So even outside of your big, sexy hurricanes, we're seeing these slower moving disturbances. Case in point, the 2016 flood. Case in point would be Hurricane Harvey. It did most of its damage as a tropical storm or depression that didn't move. Yeah. It was very slow moving. And God help us if something like that centered over us. It's happened.
Dodged the bullets last few years. It's Lafayette in general. I mean,
absolutely. If you look at just pure wind down, we had Delta. We forgot about Hurricane Delta, and then there was Hurricane Zeta, and that was a hyperactive season by far. We were in the cone of uncertainty for 46 days. Nobody can claim they've been in a cone, some sort of cone, depending on what storm it was. But I actually did a presentation at the AMS, the American Meteorological Society conference, and that was the title of my talk, 46 Days in the Cone of Uncertainty.
That's when he's title of this podcast.
There you go.
46 days in the cone.
Yeah, right. And that cone of uncertainty, even when you're near it, maybe not in it, you're still... 2/3 of the time, your hurricane's going to fall inside of that cone, but 1/3 of the time, it's going to jump outside of any particular cone that is forecast. And maybe not so when the hurricane's close to the coast, but when we're talking 1 or 2 days out, if the cone's nearby, you better be paying attention. And you don't have to be in the cone to have severe weather. Any storm that strikes west of us, say up toward Houston, or even further down the Texas coastline, we're susceptible to the heavy rain, tornadoes,
and so
damaging winds.
The east side of the hurricanes the most.
Generally,
right?
You look at Hurricane Lily when it came in 2002, that was a west-loaded storm. All the worst weather was on the west side of the storm. The eye came right over Lafayette. It was falling apart at that time. But all the damage was on the northern and the western part of the eye wall. That's why there was so much damage in Crowley, Jennings, and then on up through Eunice, more than you would have thought.
Well, I mean, and speaking about this trend of, stronger winds, stronger storms. I mean, just the other day we had, a couple of months ago was a tornado hit New Iberia. And I went out there and I looked at some of the damage. I was blown away the power of the tornado.
Right.
I've never seen or heard anything. I've seen tornadoes like up west and other places, but I've never seen something create that much damage in Louisiana. So is that normal too? Or
yeah, well, we're kind of a little bit different here.
Do we just not hear about it? But I mean, dude,
we hear about it more because we have, everybody's got an iPhone or a phone, can take video. The reports, the crowdsourcing of information is sometimes we're observing that we're observing better, right? And you want to make sure, if you're trying to make a scientific, you can make a scientific statement without evaluating, are we just observing better and we're observing that we're observing better, or let's take this out. And there's no real trend tornadic wise for us. The Gulf of Mexico is our saving factor in the wintertime when we do have severe weather threats, because it kind of throws a wet blanket on your tornadoes. So typically around here, our tornadoes are EF0, 70 to 90 mile an hour storms, EF1. I can't remember if the New Iberia tornado was classified as EF2. I think it was EF2. So it was pushing maybe 110 mile an hour winds.
Have I seen a tornado like that before?
I've seen damage in the wake of one. February, gosh, it must have been about 10 years. Not in Acadiana, we've had a few. And interestingly enough, the hot spots for Acadiana for tornadoes, Acadia, Evangeline Parish, Jeff Davis Parish. That's just about the sweet spot. Typically, as storms are coming in from Texas and moving through Louisiana, the Gulf of Mexico gets involved and starts to weaken the intensity of tornadic production.
Is that because the heaviness in the air?
Yes, it's a cooler, damper air mass, and that takes away from the uplift when we're looking for rising motion. And a lot of the action that we see never reaches the ground. We can see these swirls on Doppler radar, but rarely do we get those reaching the ground. But there are totally exceptions. But there's no real trend on tornadic activity, uptick or downtick, or nor severe weather for that matter. But we do know things are moving more slowly. So the flood threat has certainly been an uptick over the last 20 to 30 years.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to ask you, because we're in real estate, and one of the major problems we're dealing with is flooding, right?
Right.
And so, there's not a house that we sell that we're not exploring that history.
Right.
And one thing that I've noticed, and it seems like last summer, at the beginning of this summer, it seems like we had a real dry summer. I don't know if that was real or if that was just perception.
We had a pretty wet July, August. It's so variable. But, I mean, what we have observed outside of tropical activity has been pretty normal. It's pretty...
So it's been normal.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm asking is because it seems like we know the politicians, especially in South Louisiana, and the administration, I mean, that is a high priority.
Correct.
Because the constituents are concerned about that.
Right.
Not to mention...
Right. Oh, I'm a champion for flood mitigation, believe me.
Right. And so, it seems like since the new administration here, our leadership in Lafayette came into play, they've actually made that a priority and actually done some really important, jobs, like, for instance, downtown. And then they also built these, retention detention ponds.
Ponds,
I guess.
Right.
And I have to say, we have not had since this work is done. And they also cleaned out a lot of the drainage and a lot of the ditches and the coulees and stuff. They removed a lot of debris. And we haven't experienced in the last few years, at least 3 or 4 years, any type of major flooding event. We've had some scares.
Right.
Like I have some of our clients have those big water levees that and they deploy those. Right. But luckily we haven't had in the last I think maybe 4 years any kind of major flooding. And so I said, man, it seems like it's working. It seems like what we're doing is helping and working. But then the other question is, have we not received that much rainfall that would actually test what we've done?
That's exactly right. We haven't had tests. We've
had normal tropical,
we've been lucky. We've had the hurricanes go west or east of us. We haven't had direct hits on those hurricanes, and any given hurricane, even if it's a Cat 1, can produce 10, 15 inches of rain in less than 24 hours. So We haven't had that since the acid test of 2016. So,
which was totally that. I mean, they call that what, 100-year flood or 200?
yeah, I'm getting away from those numbers because those numbers have changed. What used to be a 100-year flood is now a 50 to 60-year flood based on the trends that we're seeing across the Gulf Coast.
That term, 100,
yes,
50-year, is that really like do they mean like we're only going to have this? Or the number suggests we'll only have this within a 50-year period?
Yeah, well, let's just take a 100-year flood. For Lafayette, I don't know what, I think the specific number, a 100-year flood is maybe somewhere between 11 to 13 inches, right? Let's even back up even further. What does a 100-year flood mean?
Yeah.
Okay. What it used to mean, you could expect the rainfall intensity, maybe not scope, but rainfall intensity at one locale once every 100 years. So every year you go in with a 1% chance of having a flood. But statistics doesn't work that way. You can have 3 100-year floods in a decade and then not have anything for 150 years.
Played sled, I know.
Right.
You might get 10 balls laying on black.
Right. And what builders build on is, try to build to the 100-year flood level, or that's where we try to buy, right? But it's a little bit of an uneven playing field because you get into commercial real estate, and when you're building a big shopping center, I don't know what the actual law in the books is for Lafayette Parish or the city, but they build for once every 10 or 20-year retention pond, right? So, for example, you take the Costco area that's been built, and they probably have done a good job on mitigating a once-in-a-20-year rainfall. But if you have a once-in-a-30-year rainfall, guess what? That water is going to be spilling into the lower areas, which typically are subdivisions. I'm one of them. Case in point, I flooded in the 2016 flood.
Can you share what subdivision you're in? Area?
Yeah, I'm over by Como High
Okay.
and National Park subdivision, and I've seen 7 or 8 inch rainfalls, and it comes up halfway on the lawn. And I told my wife, it's like, I think when I researched my house was not in a floodplain. And long story short, Corps of Engineers came in '89, said this area is in a floodplain. After I did freedom of information.
Rob Perillo lives in a flood?
Well, yeah. And not because I didn't because of due diligence. No, they knew about it, but they changed it. I'm not going to say who. I'm not here to throw darts at anybody, but the floodplain information was changed so developers could go ahead and develop. Once they developed certain subdivisions, and I could rattle off 3 or 4, I'm not going to do that right now because I don't want anybody's real estate value to go down. But then after they were built, then the city and the parish recognized, there was a flood issue here. We need to re-examine this again. And I can tell you that preliminary flood maps were made in the early 90s based off the 1989 data, and those maps were thrown out. So I bought my house on 1983 data that I didn't realize was 1983.
And then they came in 1996, re-updated.
And re-updated. You know how it's been going ever since then with FEMA 2.0 and the flood rates going up. So my flood insurance is higher. Still, buy flood insurance. It is the best bang for the buck. It's totally worth it. No matter where you live in Lafayette. Right. I don't care how high you are, buy flood insurance.
That's right.
But the scale got slid back against my favor. I actually pursued legal channels and everything else, and but since then, in my area, when Camellia was extended, they built those retention ponds, and specifically to my subdivision, and the current administration is working on more retention detention over by Boyer Park, which will help my subdivision out and a couple of other subdivisions out. And hopefully will ease some of we know for certain, the commercial building that's starting on Camellia, going down to Vero School Road, and that whole corridor from Vero all the way to Ambassador Caffrey and then on up where we continue to build. But it's kind of getting baked in that we will have more flood events. There's no doubt in my mind. Statistically, the statistics have been kind to us since 2016.
Sure, that's what it is. It's like, man, like especially just in the last 4 or 5 years, it seems like, man, they really put a effort into cleaning the coulees, cleaning the drainage and the sewer lines. I mean the the wastewater and everything.
Right.
And yet, when we haven't had any major flood, I lived downtown for 15 years and we, I never saw flooding like we did until, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. I remember when Pops moved into where they are right there. Like before, I think T. Coons was in there, and then I was seeing T. Coons, but I don't remember Bonnie Bells or something. I think was in there, but I don't remember them flooding until Colin moved in.
Right.
And so it was strange to see that, and it got worse and worse. And so I don't know if it was from the stoppage or the clogged up in the
that's probably part of it,
or is it because we just had more water and then now we haven't seen that. It seems to be working.
I think we're seeing a microcosm of urbanization, right? You look at Houston. I mean, you look at it from a satellite image and you see 50 miles, 50 by 50 square area that is all concrete.
Right.
There's no green space. There's no place for water to permeate and get into the ground. And I think we have the luxury in Lafayette and Acadiana for having a lot of green space and doing what we can to utilize that green space and learn from your Houstons or Dallas, these big cities, or New Orleans for that matter. New Orleans is a whole nother story because of subsidence and everything else going on. But learning that we need to maintain these green spaces and create conduits for retention and detention because we're limited by elevation. Everybody, in Lafayette, or wherever you're buying in this area, if you're looking at a home, to me, my first look is, how high is this? What's the base flood elevation? And where am I with respect to drainage ditches, bayous, coulees, all that stuff?
Yeah. So the detention ponds that they are building, the retention and detention ponds, it's when the river gets to a certain, this is a question, when the river gets to a certain height, it starts to overflow into these ponds. How much do you think that's going to help? I mean, what's the volume of rain that we can?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not an engineer. I know it's going to help on a day-to-day basis. Maybe I might flood in my house in a 15-inch rain in 24 hours. That may be raised to 16 or 17 inches now. It's buying some relief. I don't know how much relief because I'm more of a let's collect the data first and then make an assessment. And we haven't had a chance to, and I don't want to see the chance to collect that kind of data. But everything I look at from a climatological standpoint, from an educational standpoint, and understanding the research is that while we're going to see more of these 2016 floods, there's going to be more in our lifetime. I can almost guarantee that. It's how you try to mitigate it and how you try to plan around it.
Yeah. Well, so that brings me to, when you guys are using percentages.
Correct. Yeah. Okay.
So we had an argument in our office, we don't know what that really means.
Right.
So when you say 80% chance of rain in this area, what does that really mean?
Okay. Well, first off, you got to look at the area we broadcast to, which is pretty much from Lake Charles to the Chaffalay Basin, west to east, the northern parishes of Acadiana, that'd be Evangeline, over to St. Landry, and then down to the coast. So it's a widespread area. So when we say an 80% chance of rain for that area, we're saying in a 12-hour period, if we're just talking about tomorrow, an 80% chance of rain, 8 out of 10 of everybody should get some rainfall, measurable rainfall. It could be just 100th of an inch that wets the ground, or it could be, a substantial rainfall. But we're fairly confident we're going to see rain, and it's a conditional probability. Usually it's an on-off. Are we going to see showers and thunderstorms? The answer is yes. 100% chance we're going to see thunderstorms, but how much of our audience is going to be impacted by those thunderstorms? And then this is where you're in the weeds, is that you're also forecasting to weigh toward Lafayette, your population zones.
Yeah.
So, I could forecast a 10% chance of rain, but if we have a thunderstorm sitting right in the downtown area, it's impacting half of Lafayette's population, and we've kind of busted. That would translate to maybe a 50% chance of rain. But so we're hedging our bets. It's a conditional probability, and 8 out of 10 should get some wetness at some point, right? And
8 out of 10.
Eight out of 10 times.
Okay.
8 out of 10 times. 80%, 8 out of 10 times. If we're doing a 30% chance of rain, typical summer forecast, 30% chance of rain 3 days in a row, one of those 3 days you're going to get nailed with a shallow thunderstorm. So it's a forecast on aerial coverage and then over a certain time period.
Is that based off of like your Doppler?
Well, it's based off of, we do model analysis. We look at hardcore, what's called MOS data, which is basically raw computer output from 8, 9, 10 different models. One model saying 20% for Lafayette. Another model may be saying 60%. One's 80%. One's not seeing anything. So what we are doing as meteorologists, as forecasters, when we come in, there's a lot of, people don't realize how much evaluation goes into a forecast. I spend the first 2 hours of my day evaluating the forecast, going through emails or whatever, maybe take a break and then go to work. Well, no, from the general public. They want to know the next storm system. Is it going to be severe in my locale? I try to answer as many as I can on air, but it gets untenable because, if we have a higher end weather event, I'm easily getting over 100 email. Well, it's a combination of emails, messages through social media.
The public's emailing you and you're answering.
I try to answer everyone. I can't do it in a timely manner anymore because it's impossible. But if there's something going on, I see a lot of the same questions. Like, okay, that's something that I need to address on air. Let's talk about this. It helps shape my coverage because it helped. And in the old olden days, I got a call from Mrs. Boudreau out in the country, and she'd be concerned about something, and we only got our concerns or reports through the phone. Now we have this glorious internet and social media. I love social media because now I get to crowdsource what's on people's minds and what is most important for me to cover in my weathercast or digital, whatever I'm doing.
You got to make it compelling and interesting.
Well, and you're trying to answer those questions, and I'm trying to mitigate more messages coming in, right? So that helps me shape our coverage and what we think is most important. And every day I do my couple hours analysis. I might go for a bike ride, do a little exercise, then get dressed, go to work. And I have to brief the newsroom by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We have a meeting. How are we going to be covering our news stories? The news stories are already evolving, but the 2 o'clock meeting is for, okay, how are we covering things for 5, 6, and 10 o'clock and for the rest of our day, whether it's digital or whether it's on air. And I'll brief the newsroom. So I got to be connected and know what I want to say, and more importantly, how much weather time I need. I always ask for a lot more time than I actually need. Hopefully they're not listening to this podcast. But the more time I get, the more time I get to elucidate on some of these facets that we may face in a weather system. Sometimes today's a windy day. Hey, 35, 40 mile an hour winds out in the country. That means for sporadic power outages for those folks that know what happens in 40 mile per hour winds. They're out of power for a little bit. Tree limb comes down on a pole, and then, that's it. So it's a multifaceted attack. And then for me and the news department, they want to know when's the next weather maker, when's the next big weather maker. And we've been kind of in between, not talking. There's not a whole lot going on. We got a little rain chances here. All that severe weather's north of us. But toward the end of next week, things look to get busier, and we have some weather makers on the horizon. There's going to be, looks like a flood event shaping up for somewhere on the Gulf Coast states, but it looks like Texas, north of us as of yesterday. Today may be a different story, but we know something's going to be up, and it's going to be close, and it's going to be more rain event related maybe than severe weather, but there's going to be severe weather elements as well.
Well, so how far out can you actually, I know we can look at like a 10-day forecast,
right?
But how far out are y'all looking or trying to?
Well, okay, in the wintertime, I try to look beyond 10 days just to see what the trends are, what the polar vortex is doing. Are we going to have these spurious cold outbreaks that are going to impact our region? But operationally speaking, in the wintertime, you're looking at a 7-day forecast is okay. 10 days are a lot easier to do in the summertime most of the time because our weather doesn't change as much, and we're looking for disruptors, tropical disruptors or front disruptors, which are rare, but once we start tracking them, hey, there is going to be something that's going to be going up. We do 10 days because guess what? You open up your phone and your app gives you 10 days. And I used to do a 6-day. I started out in the business. We were doing 5 days, but we didn't have much computing power to bring us beyond that.
Right.
And then we moved to a 7-day, 8-day, and then it's like
now we're
about 7 or 8 years ago. It's like, well, We're competing with automation and apps. We better come up with a better 10-day forecast than you can get off of any computer program.
Well, that's my next question. What's the best app for us?
Oh, of course, the KATC weather app.
All right, there you go.
And I can tell you why, because I edit the data that you see. Well, I edit the data that you see in Lafayette. So sometimes you'll see a 1,000% chance of rain, but because I hit one too many zeros more ago. Some crazy stuff. The high is 785.
If there's a mistake, we know
well, generally it's me or one of my guys, but
like if
you get it says at times it's me. It's a lot, but I don't want just to let AI forecast. The AI may go an 80% chance of storms for Lafayette, and it's like shooting from the hip.
Yeah.
Because it's just saying Lafayette's going to get it, but then if you look at the same forecast model for Scott, and it's going at 20% chance of rain. So there's no context. Normally, when people see an 80% chance of rain, they know it's going to be wet. They infer maybe intensity, but we're not inferring that. We'll say an 80% chance of rain, but expect a half inch to an inch. But sometimes we're saying 80% chance of rain and localized 5 to 8 inches of rain. We're in an event where we're elevating. A flood watch may be posted, that sort of thing. So what we're trying to do is improve on just I call it stupid AI, because there's no curation of the data, and you're working off of maybe one model. The models are good on these apps.
Are the models AI?
Yeah,
it's taking everything that's ever happened, but then the human element is like, okay, I'm looking at all.
They're forecasting straight off of models, and models miss stuff. And that's why we evaluate 6 or 7 models every day.
The whole AI, like it's blowing, it's in all of our lives right now. And so we're seeing it, we're using it, and it seems like it gets better and better the more data that it has. Is it the same way for weather? Like, are the models improving the more data that they're getting, the more time that goes by? Are we more accurate?
We've seen that over the last 10 years, a real increase in model, the mesh of the model that I talk about a 3-kilometer model, 4-kilometer model, meaning that's the data points that are baked into that model. Each one of those data points has 32 to 40 different layers, and each one of those points has a differential equation that's a page long that describes the weather at that point of time, and then takes that data and does integration for 5 minutes, and this is what it's going to look like in 5 minutes. Throws out the old data, and then works off of that data, and then throws out the old data, does another 5-minute iteration. So the sophistication of the models has gotten to the point where they're good, but we still can't nail down exactly where a thunderstorm is going to form. Right. We know we're going to see storms, but we can't nail it down. So what we do when we're battling the digital products is like, well, let's make it, we do the app for Lafayette and Lafayette centric. It's like, let's update the numbers based on the other model data we're seeing, the trends we're seeing. There is much more information getting into the models, such as what's the radar look like right now. 10 years ago, we didn't know what the radar, this is the models making a forecast, has no idea what the initialization, where the radar is. And now those models, like the predictive radar model we use, it's good, but it's not great. But every hour it updates based on the trends that it's seeing, and then it does those calculations forward. So we've seen the calculation ability and the computer ability really coming into play, but we're coming to the top of the mountain where we got, they're good, but they're never going to be great. They're good, and they've gotten better. And for
how much better can they get?
Well, I like that they can geotag you, so you know where you are, and you'll have maybe the Weather Channel app or the KATC app will say, thunderstorm rain expected in your area in the next 10 minutes.
Hey, get ready.
Right. Or you'll hear my voice on the app, right?
It's impressive how accurate it is.
Yeah, it's come a long way, and I love that aspect of digital because it's offloaded some work, but it's also increased our workload because compared to, and I was just talking with Dick Farrow about this the other day. He was in town, and we visited and just talked about how much, when we were doing weather back in the 1980s and 90s, one, we were the purveyor of the data. Nobody else got to see the data, right? There was no internet, and we were the ones making the call. But since then, not only is the information now freely available, but the sheer immensity of data I would say is on the order of 100 or 1,000 times more. I don't have enough time in the day. If I want to just be a pure weather nerd and be a forecaster, there's not enough hours in the day for me to make. Just, you have to hedge studying all the models. Where can the models go wrong? That's why it's important to get a degree in meteorology, because you've got to go through all the math, all the physics, and understand the limitations of the models and know what model's performing better than others. And that goes back and forth. You can't trust one model all the time. Everybody talks about the European model, the GFS model, and we've seen the GFS the American model got really good a couple of years ago, and then it fell off, and the European model got a little bit better again. So it's always evaluating. And then we have new models.
So is it? I mean, there's part of it's just like gut.
There's
experience. Like you're like, hey, look, based on what
I don't want to say gut, because that's like how I'm feeling. Yeah. But I will say it's a calculated statistical hedge, right? And then you always have timing. You have to worry about timing of these storms, because it's a big deal if storms come in at midnight versus 6 or 7 in the evening when people are on the road, or vice versa in the morning. So you have all those factors factored in when you're making a forecast. It's a lot of information, and we're trying to put together as much fact-based information. And I've been lucky where I'm an on-air meteorologist that I say exactly how I feel about confidence is kind of low on this, or you're never supposed to say confidence is low in the forecast. Oh, well, then you don't know what you're talking about. So, no, I'm telling you, there's a lot of question marks here, more than the normal amount of question marks. And that's where the science of meteorology right now is in social meteorology. What I know up here is never a surprise to me, even if it's not in the forecast. It's like, well, we didn't see that coming. It was on the table, but we kind of discounted that happening. But we need to be able to communicate those uncertainties better to the public.
Sure.
And that's where social science comes in, and what I say and how people perceive what I'm saying. Oh, Rob, you're always an alarmist talking about a potential severe weather threat. I know it's a marginal threat. It's a 5% chance of something happening in this area. But I cannot not say it's zero. We don't have to worry about severe weather. I'm not the severe weather experts. The folks up at the Storm Prediction Center are the severe weather experts. And I know what they're saying. And many times I'll say, well, I think the Storm Prediction Center is going to pare back our severe weather threat in tomorrow's outlook. Or I think we're going to get thrown into a higher risk level. Yeah. And that's what I try to do is give context to the information that's out there and make it pliable for, hopefully.
As somebody watches your reports,
right.
We appreciate the being candid with us. And
right.
Hey, I'm not sure this is going to happen.
Right.
Instead of giving us a forecast and then, everybody calling you a liar.
Right. And I've been lucky because I've been on air for 35 years now. People think of me as a family member, and I do the same about them. And, I want to be honest and upfront and be the same person on air as off air. I might curse a little bit more off air at home or when working in the backyard or whatever. No. But it does happen. It does happen. Being and Dick Farrow was a great example of that. He's the same guy on air as off air, and anybody that's successful in our business is that. Most everybody is that way.
Well, you could tell your passion, and to be good at anything, you got to be passionate.
Correct.
And I could you'd mentioned some people saying, well, you're an alarmist, but it's right. I see it as more of you're passionate about getting that message out there.
Right. And I want to say what might go wrong.
Right.
And just in case.
And right. Let's face it, like when you have a hurricane or a major event, I mean, it's got to be exciting, even though, it's not something you're wishing on anybody. No. You're passionate about your job and getting into it and studying it. And it comes across, on our TV. Right. You're into it. So I could understand why people are like, well, you're just an alarmist. But really, it's about that. Now, when a major event comes along, like, is it just like go time and you're just locked in for that period of time? Because it looks like you never leave the studio.
That's why I mentioned a couple of weeks back in the posting. I'm 35 years on air in Acadiana, 40 as a professional meteorologist, and 20 this year at katc. But it's a 24/7, 365-day-a-year job. Even when I'm not on, and I get 5 weeks of vacation, 6 weeks out. But 7 or 8 weeks I'm out because of conferences. I still do continuing education. So I'm not on air but maybe say 40 weeks out of the year, right? But if they don't see me, they don't think I'm working or I'm off or I don't care. It's like, no, I'm watching, and I have to watch everything to make sure our coverage is appropriate. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on vacation, I've been out of town, at a happy hour, and stuff's going down. It's like, guys, I got to do something on social media here, or I got to talk to one of my meteorologists, that sort of thing. So it's an always on thing. But when you have these big events, it's adrenaline's up, yes, but consternation, anxiety, like everybody else, is I have my own flood anxiety. I have to deal with that as well. I have to deal with that as well. My wife is a severe weather widow. I say that all the time. She's at home all the time riding out the hurricanes while I'm at the station. Every time. And she's a partner. She's actually, KATC doesn't pay her, but I wouldn't be able to do my job if I didn't have somebody taking care of my kids. When my parents were alive, Naomi would cart them out of town for Hurricane Rita. Naomi was on the road in the middle of the night evacuating for Hurricane Rita, because it's like, okay, this is going to be a big hit. Right. We got off okay on the wind, but that surge was horrible. But, there are times when it's like, okay, my mom is a special needs patient, get out of town. This way I don't have to worry about you. Because there's this communication.
Are you just at the studio the whole time?
No, I do a lot of work from my house. I do a lot of work from my house or off of my phone. I mean, that's the beauty of the internet and the curse at the same time, because the data is always there and available.
Now, you said, I'm just curious, because you said you go on vacation. Where do you go on vacation? Do you go somewhere warm, or do you go somewhere cold? Or
no, I generally go where there's self-service is limited. I love going out. My favorite jam
in the woods. You go like,
now my favorite jam. Well, because my wife's from El Paso and the desert area. My kids love going into the desert area. We go. Big Bend is a day's drive away. And I know I can get out of cell phone range for a period of time.
I've been wanting to go.
Wide open sky.
Love it.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And anywhere in the West.
To go in the wintertime too.
Oh, yeah. Well, you got to be careful in the wintertime. You can have snow events up on the Chisos bases. Oh, yeah. They just had a big snow there 2 weeks ago, which you wouldn't have expected that far south. But you can also get 100 degrees in February over there as well. So I do like the heat. I like the dry. I like the open landscapes, and changing my environment and getting out of humidity is but vacations are limited most of the time. Well, on a personal note, we're taking care of my mother-in-law, so my wife and I are, my wife spends a couple of months out of every year out taking care of my mother-in-law. She needs assistance. So it's complicated.
She's from El Paso. How did y'all meet?
We met in Houston when I worked for a consulting firm in Houston, a weather consulting firm. I did offshore marine and industrial meteorology. That was my first job in the South, where we made forecasts for rigs in the Gulf of Mexico, ships around the world, to all the petrochemical plants that needed accurate temperature forecasts, better than what you could get on the National Weather Service. And they wanted 10-day forecasts, so they knew how to warm their lines and operate at optimal capacity. And then I did 2 years of aviation weather in Houston, and I met my wife I was friends with a bunch of geophysicists, birds of a feather, same science guys. They're all geophysicists. They were trying to talk me, Rob, get into seismic. That's where the money is. Like, no, your story moves much too slow. It's fun looking for that stuff, but it doesn't change. The rock is going to be there 100 million years from now. So I just met her at a mutual friend's house, and she thought I was a beer-swilling softball player who happened to be a meteorologist, and she was spot on.
So how'd you get into meteorology?
I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist in grade school.
Oh, so
third grade. You
were born to do that.
Yes, I was a big fan of Jacques Cousteau, so I was interested in oceanography. I grew up in the late 60s, so everybody wanted to be a baseball player, astronaut, and then I watched Jacques Cousteau. I was like, oh, maybe I need to be an oceanographer. This is interesting. He's exploring. I like being explored. I like, finding out about the world around me. And right in third grade, we had a project where we were building a kite to fly. And my mom was helping me out. My dad worked nights, so it was my mom and I worked on this project. And it's like, well, what makes wind? How does wind work? Because I already was dissecting, well, how does wind work? We need to build our kite to how wind works, and why does the wind blow, and 5 miles an hour and 10 miles an hour, big difference in the kite. It was a miserable failure, but that year I think my mom and dad bought me several like introduction to meteorology books for kids. And that's when I started observing. When we moved to, originally I was born in the Bronx. We moved to the suburbs in the mid 60s, and I was 4 or 5, probably 4. And we had a severe thunderstorm impact the house. And it was a brand new house, you know, out in the suburbs in 1964, I want to say this was. And the rain came in the windows and into the room. We didn't have storm windows on the house, so it was brand new. And that scared the heck out of my brother and I. And then I became weather aware from then on out. So anytime thunderstorms happened, there was this great amount of fear. But it's like, well, I want to see how this one's going to play out. So my face is always planted on the window.
So you knew like way back. So like,
right.
You're in high school.
In high school, I was gearing toward getting a degree in meteorology. Which
where did you get your degree?
I went to Oswego State, which is part of the State University of New York system, and I went there. Well, in fact, SUNY offered 7 meteorological programs: Buffalo, Albany, Brockport, Oneonta, Oswego, downstate New York, a couple of spots. I went to Oswego because it averaged the highest amount of snow in upstate New York per year. They had a lot of lake effect snow, and that's what was my specialty in college. I studied lake effect, and I, by the luck of trying,
studied what?
Lake effect snow.
Lake, what is that?
That's when they had that big blizzard in Buffalo in December. It's small scale. We call it mesoscale meteorology, where the lake influences the weather more than the actual big picture of the weather. So it was studying small scale meteorology for southeastern Lake Ontario, and that actually, because I tried to get a degree in math at the same time, you got to take a lot of math for meteorology. I was one course shy of getting a Bachelor of Science in math as well, because I knew I could get a job in math. Right. I couldn't get a job in this graduation. I was one of 13. I was the only one that had a job upon graduation, but I made my luck because I was studying something that the local nuclear power plant was interested in, and I was using their data, and they didn't have that data in their models in case they released radiation. So they said, hey, how about you do research for us, and we'll pay SUNY Research Foundation to research it. So I started a research project, and then I migrated to the nuclear power plant, where I started incorporating procedures. If they released radiation, where was that radiation was going to go? So that's that.
Super interesting.
Yeah, I've had lots of varied jobs in meteorology before television, but television is the most satisfying because you see the manifestations of your forecasts. Right. I mean, working at a nuclear power plant, my job was, if they release radiation, I would have to drive to that point of radiation to tell where people to evacuate. It's like, this is not a good way. And they
talk about they were not like wanting to hear you.
Yeah, right. And they were building an off-site weather center 10 miles away from the plant, but not at that time. This is coming off of the 3 Mile Island, where they almost had a meltdown, and weather became a very important part of operations at a nuclear power plant. And at that time, when I started that research project, the models that they used for dispersing isotopes, radioisotopes, did not take into account that there's this big fat lake that dominates the weather 30-40% of the time. So their models are going to be horrible or not even be nearly right. So that's where they started investing in money, and that also kept the Nuclear Regulatory Commission off the backs of nuclear power plants, as long as they were matriculating toward getting weather into their models and having procedures in place if and when an accident should occur,
which hopefully never happens. So
I was there for a couple of incidents.
Really?
I don't want to say how the crew reacted. I was there for, I'm not even going to say the power plant, but there was a small earthquake, and I'm not working in the control room. I'm right outside of the control room, so I don't have to wear the TLD, the dose meter or anything, but I'm there with everybody that's in charge of the plant safety. We have an earthquake. I know I need to go over to that wall and start taking down weather information and putting that into a computer. The rest of the people that are around me that I know have to be around me, they're putting on their coats and they're getting ready to go. It's like, wait a minute, this is not in the plan.
Right.
It's a small emergency, number one. It was an earthquake. We identified that, but everybody's afraid. Oh, they were about to bounce. Yeah, right. And they're getting out. It's like, okay, this is not a good career path for me. I can tell that right now. It's changed.
You don't want to be the last person in the nuclear.
Right. I don't want to be Homer Simpson eating the donuts going, well, maybe I'll hit that button.
Yeah.
You know? So that was kind of, it was an eye-opening experience. It's like, maybe this is not going to be right for me. But I wasn't sure at the time. But, things work out for other reasons. And I wound up getting tired of upstate New York snow. So I sent resumes out to everywhere. I sent 100 resumes out. And I got a call from this consulting firm in Houston where I worked for 3 years and where I met my wife, Naomi.
And it changed your life forever.
It did change my life. And how'd
you end up in life?
Well, I had a friend that worked at the consulting firm. His name is Mark Skirto. He was trying to get into TV, and he was going down to the local TV station, and he was making tapes, and he said, man, you should come down and check it out. And it's like, I went there, checked it out. It's like, oh, wow, at the time, I'm working with ex-Navy, ex-Air Force, and ex-air traffic controllers in the aviation part of my career. And then I go to the TV station, and there's all these good-looking women that are working at the station. It's a little bit more diverse. Nobody's smoking in here. I worked in a smoke-filled room of forecasters, and it was, your eyes are tearing after an 8-hour shift, and it was a high-pressure job. When I was doing aviation meteorology, 10% was meteorology, 90% was flight following, diplomatic clearances, making sure the pilot, this is a worldwide operation. You always had somebody in trouble. There was a lot of things going on. And I went down to the TV station. I was like, wow, the meteorologist is driving a nice car. And you know what? I'm as smart as that guy. Maybe I should consider TV. So the next week I went down with Mark and cut a tape and put it up on the shelf, didn't do anything with it. Mark winds up getting a job in Tyler, Texas. That's KLTV. And he gets out of operational forecasting and into TV. And then about 6 months later, I said, Mark, can you help me put together my tape? And he did. And I sent it to a talent agency. And a year later, I got a call from Jim Keaty at the time. And then I talked to Maria Placer. And then they said, well, let's have you talk to our chief meteorologist, Dick Farrow, which I had heard of him before I even moved to Lafayette, because I would call tool pushers when I worked in the offshore industry. Hey, what weather services do you use? Oh, no, I just listened to Dick Farrow. It's like, who's this Dick Farrow guy? I don't know who the heck he is. Because at the time, 10% or 5% of meteorologists on air actually had degrees. They were weathercasters, they were sports guys, they were news guys that just found their zone. They liked weather and doing weather, but didn't have much of a background in it. So I said, well, look at this. Dick Farrow is a meteorologist. He's got a master's degree, and he's a weather nerd first, broadcaster second. This is my job. So that's how I got into tele.
That's really cool. And to Lafayette.
And to Lafayette. And been here. That was in 1988.
Well, I've got one more serious question before I get to some other things. I wanted to ask, like, going back to like the flooding events, we also seem to, like, at least this year, we had the freeze over Christmas. It seemed like it was much longer.
Yeah.
Is that something we should also expect to continue?
That's a crazy part of the climate system, the new paradigm that we're observing, right? Our winters are getting warmer. Global temperatures are warming up. Air temperatures are warming up. Oceans are absorbing that heat and carbon dioxide. So there we have this background heat. So, and I would say 9 of the last 10 winters, we've been above normal, the late 20th century average, by far. Above normal temperature-wise. We take the highs and the lows, average them out, you get a mean temperature, and you go December, January, February. So every year, and I hate doing winter forecasts because I made the winter forecast. We're going to be above normal this winter, which we were about 7.5 degrees above normal. March continuing this March. But people remember the cold Arctic outbreaks. In 2018, we had an outbreak. In 2021, we had an outbreak. This past winter, we had an outbreak. We had our coldest period the week of Christmas, 5 days in a row of freezing temperatures, and then no freezing temperatures in January, February, until a couple of weeks ago, we had 31 degrees. And that's what we are going to expect as we move forward, because what's happening on a large scale in our climate system is that you've heard about the polar vortex, and that is usually a very stable item. Parts of that vortex break off and they get slung through the Northeast or the Midwest or the Rockies. That is completely normal. But we're seeing the polar vortex itself is getting stretched out by extreme heat. The heating of our globe is most pronounced at the polar ice caps. So we're seeing the patterns up there getting dislodged, and we're seeing more of these renegade cold outbreaks at just about any time during the year. A few years back, we had our coldest part of the winter was in November. So we're seeing these anomalies that 15, 20 years ago, we couldn't put any kind of climate tag on it. Oh, what is there any climate signal in this? And now we can do the math, and the computing power is there. It's like, yes, there is a 5 or 10% or 15% influence on these patterns, and it's making weather more variable, and the higher end events higher here, and the lower end events lower down here. And I always explained it, even when I was going to college. It's like you look at it, it looks like a seismograph. You plot out temperature or any type of weather parameter. But now we're seeing more. I mean, if you average it out, oh, yeah, we're warming up. But is it really influencing our weather? Yes, it is. We're not warming up during the days in Lafayette or Acadiana. We're warming up more at nights. Why is that? Well, the background temperature of the Gulf of Mexico is warmer, and we're just reflecting a warmer Gulf. When I moved to Lafayette, the average low temperature at night in July or August, 73 degrees. Right now, it's 75.6. So it's 2.5 degrees warmer, 2.6 degrees warmer at night, maybe 1/10 or 2/10 of a degree hotter during the day.
Interesting, because like you hear it's getting warmer where you're like, man, it seems like during the day it's the same, but you're saying that it's more at night.
More at night. We're seeing the warming at night, and then we're seeing more variable patterns where early 2000s, we had a tremendous drought and we generated 100-degree temperatures. And then we're seeing these rainy periods, which if you look back at the data, and I've looked back at the data, I physically took the data from J.J. Davidson's house in Lafayette from 1893 to 1941, and from 1941 at the airport to the present day. I've tapped every high, low, and rainfall for Lafayette, and I did do a spreadsheet, and I that's why I keep my fingers dirty in the data, because I want to make sure that the data is right. But we're seeing these background influences that influences our pattern. We used to go through, okay, we're going to go through a 2-week wet period in August. Now it's maybe a 3-week wet period in August. And we just recently set a record rainfall for August, second only to the 1940 hurricane, where we had 19 inches. It was 2 Augusts ago, or 3, or maybe it was last year. I can't remember. I remember the high end events, but we're seeing these higher end events showing up a little bit more so. And it's not even, oh, well, that's a forecast and it's a computer model saying that. No, this is an observable trend. And what can we do to take this current trend that we're seeing and what's going to look like in 10 or 15 years? And the short story, I had a meteorologist friend of mine in Houston who worked for the ABC affiliate, which is owned by Disney. The Daily Show had contacted him when Jon Stewart was on The Daily Show, and he wanted to talk about reticence of on-air meteorologists to talk about climate. One, I get paid for the next 10 days. I want to give climate context, but that's not my job. I do post a lot more about it on social media, but I'm not here to pontificate. I'm not here to say this is it and that's it. I'm not here to challenge people's belief systems or change the way you live or anything about that. I'm just approaching it from a pure scientific deal. But Jon Stewart had contacted Tim, my buddy Tim Heller, who was working, and it's like, I can't do it. Disney won't let me appear. But it's like, oh, yeah, I'll talk about climate change. And, they came in, they wanted to say, they asked me one question, and I was wrong. They asked me about Al Gore, and it's like, okay, yeah, I wasn't into that whole movie at the time. And actually, some of the things are actually quite true in it, but I found that out later. But they asked me one question: is weather going to be observably different 30 years from now? And I said, no, you won't notice the difference. And I take that back. You got to evaluate the information. It's like, guess what? We are seeing it, and just in the last 10 or 15 years.
And you didn't know at the time. You were just saying now. You're looking back.
Right. But that piece never made it to air because there was some other things going on. I don't think somebody signed a release statement. I was all in because I was like, okay, yeah, we can make fun of this. We can talk about the monetization, the politicization of climate, but I just talk about climate in a very apolitical way.
Right.
Very apolitical way. And I'm not here to tell you what you need to do to fix it, but I'm telling you there are ramifications that we have to address. And 20 years ago, people said, well, what if we do nothing? That should be an option. I said, that is an option, but that is the most disastrous option. We have to recognize it and do what we can to mitigate. I'm not telling people how to change their lifestyles or get into electric vehicles or anything like that. It's about understanding where we're at and giving context where we're at and what we're going to leave for the generations ahead. And Louisiana's kind of on the forefront, and I'm not going to pontificate too much, but we're on the forefront of climate change. We're the most, vulnerable to, susceptible to storms, because not only climate and sea level rise is changing, but we have coastal erosion, we have subsidence, so our land is sinking, we're losing that buffer between us and hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, and 30, 40 years from now, it will be a different story. I don't think there'll be very many people living down along Highway 82, even all the way over through Cameron. I don't know how we're going to mitigate those future events.
Well, and I mean, hopefully in the next few years, we don't see any major, flooding anywhere in Louisiana.
Right,
because
right.
we won't be able to afford insurance.
That's
going up
another
30 to 40%. So
the insurers and the reinsurers are dropping out.
It's almost impossible to, for an average person to buy something in south of Vermilion Parish, south of Abbeville,
correct,
and still pay for insurance. And you said, we are sinking, and that is a fact.
Right.
I mean, most people don't believe us, but like if you have an elevation certificate from 1990,
correct,
and
you're 2 inches low, you're 1 to 2 inches lower than that.
You better keep that one,
right?
Because if you go get another one, you're going to be below whatever that one was. So, I mean, that is interesting.
The data, the technology is off the charts. We have LiDAR data now that we can see that Lafayette goes up and down a 0.5 millimeter to 1 millimeter with the tide every day.
Really?
And it's more pronounced as you get down to the coast. But I-10 corridor, we go up, but because we have this LiDAR data, we can detect.
That's very interesting.
Yes.
With the tide?
With the tides, especially when you have, full moon or new moon tides, we see we're floating.
Well, that brings me to another question. You just mentioned the full moon. How much does the full moon or the moon in general affect our weather? And does something like when there's a full moon, should we expect clear weather? Or?
No, the only thing the moon really amplifies is tidal action for the most part. That's what generates tides across the area. You take a moon tide and you see these what they call sunny day floods in Miami now. Well, king tides, the frequency of them has gone up 100-fold.
When you're looking at the moon, and sometimes there's that halo around it.
Yeah,
what is that?
That's usually high level moisture. That's great, and it's a great old wives' tale and it's a true one. You see that high level moisture, you see a ring around the moon. That means there's a weather system approaching. There's high level moisture moving into the area. And perhaps expect rain the next day. And that sticks. And you could say that for Maine to California to Louisiana to North Dakota. It does.
So it does. So when you see that halo around that moon, you could expect some
right. The moon doesn't have effect, but we're seeing the atmospheric, the illumination of the moon on the atmosphere. We're seeing, and sometimes you'll see more jet contrails. When there's a lot of them crisscrossing the sky, we have a lot of upper level moisture because they're not evaporating, and that gives us a heads up that there's something going on there. And it's not chemtrails. I'm not even going to go chemtrails. Oh yeah, everybody wants that. That's not a thing. That's not a thing. I will tell you that. It's a. I can get into the meat and potatoes of that, but I try not to. I don't even respond to those anymore.
Well, so another question is dealing with the moon. So that the old sailor saying red sky in the morning, sailors take morning, right. And red sky at night, sailors delight.
Right.
Is that?
Yeah, well, usually the red sky in the morning means there's high level moisture moving in, and you're getting that illumination under the clouds. Whereas at the end of the day, if you have those illuminations under the clouds, those clouds are usually dissipating to a degree. So there is some truth to that as well.
All right. So since we're on this, I'm getting into the fun question.
Okay.
So farmers market. I mean, not farmers market. Farmers on now. Yeah. Tell us what. My mom swears by it.
Yeah. There's no meteorology in it. No, there's no meteorology, and they won't tell you how they come up with their forecast. But I can make a forecast for this year. Just like the Farmer's Almanac.
Yeah.
Hurricane, Gulf of Mexico, between first and second week of September. I'm 100% correct every year. That's what the Farmer's Almanac does. That's easy. Right. Cold winter in the north. There's no meteorology that goes into it. It's an entertainment value. And I don't understand. I know people that have degrees in agriculture, degrees in science, and they still work off of the Farmer's Almanac. And if Farmer's Almanac came out and said, okay, this is how we make the forecast, and it was peer reviewed, and other people could substantiate their forecast, then great, I'm in, I'm all in. I love the Farmer's Almanac for the moon names and this and that, but don't get your weather information.
That's my next question, because we know that you're into
astronomy, yeah.
Astronomy.
Yeah.
So tell us, tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, I'm an observer. I love to observe the sky, and I love to observe the stars. That's another reason for going out to the Big Bend. You want to see the Milky Way when it looks like
that's the best.
A cirrus cloud? It's like, oh my gosh, that's the Milky Way. I've finally seen it. You can't see it. Well, you can see it in Acadiana, and I've done this already. I drive out to Whiskey Bay, middle of the basin.
Yeah.
You're getting away from the lights of Lafayette, and you're in between the lights of Baton Rouge, and on the right night, you can see the Milky Way very clearly, as anybody can if you're out in Beulah Rose or you're down at a camp down by the coast and you have a good clear night. So I like to observe everything in the sky and the planets. I always was interested in astronomy. I took some courses. I took a cosmology course as an elective in college, and planetarium operations. So I got into that. And planetarium operations was kind of cool because we would go up there at night and have a few beers and the professor would come in on Mondays like, somebody set the planetarium 1 million years into the future. My roommate and I are just looking at each other. That might have been us. Yeah. But I've always been interested in the sky, space shuttle, space program. Being a kid, I was always interested in that. And I had the opportunity when I worked in aviation. I briefed every NASA pilot that was a pilot or commander for the space shuttle.
No kidding.
Because they would be training on T-38s. They'd keep up their flight skills on T-38s, and you call them up and you would do a briefing. And it's like, that was Story Musgrave, or that was so-and-so. It's like, most of the times I didn't get their names, but we did that. I briefed for the Vomit Comet, the DC-9 that would be flying parabolas. And NASA, still NASA has a U-2 aircraft, which it's a modified U-2, but the briefing would go, I need a briefing for U-2. I said, okay, when are you going, sir? That's classified. Okay, how high are you going to be flying? That's classified. Where are you going? That's classified. Okay, how about I give you a briefing for Houston right now from 0 to 70,000 feet? And he says, that's a firm. Okay, so that's all he wants. What's the current conditions? Don't even forecast, because guess what? They're going to be up at 70,000 feet in a short period of time.
That's very interesting. You've got to experience
right, and we were at the time we were involved with forecasting before the Challenger accident. We did some of the meteorological work, not all in support of that program, and then the Challenger accident occurred, and I guess that was 86 or 87 or 80. I can't remember when, but that's when NASA decided we need to have our own weather unit on site and get more observing stations. For that reason alone, and for temperature and everything else, when the solid rocket booster kind of exploded because it was frozen. So it was interesting. I've always been tied to that. And when the space shuttle came in, I would always see if the landing ground tracks came over us. And that one time I was there, I'm shooting video, and here comes Columbia, and it's breaking up in my lens. It's like, oh my God, am I just seeing what I'm seeing? And I called. As soon as I saw that, I had a NASA media line. I called up the NASA media line. So I'm a meteorologist in South Louisiana. I think I just saw the space shuttle in pieces. It did not come in overhead. And there's a long pause on the other end of the line. And it's like, thank you, sir. We appreciate that. That's when they lost the telemetry on it. And that's when they realized that, I was the first one to call it in.
Oh, you were?
And realize, and I submitted my video to NASA in case they want to, look for parts of the Columbia. It was a terrible tragedy, but I've always kind of been intimately involved with that. And even when I was in Houston, I was going to apply for a mission specialist, because they opened up the jobs at NASA for anybody with a Bachelor of Science degree in an earth science. So like, well, I can apply and at least tell somebody at the bar, hey, you know what, I'm a mission specialist candidate, for the NASA program. But that wasn't the main reason, because I was just interested. It's like, well, why not? Why not me? Okay, I was a B student. I wasn't an A student. I don't have an advanced degree, but I have a love and passion for the science. So.
Well, that's a pair. Your love and passion
right.
is amazing. And, I do have one more question. Our staff wants to know, do you believe the groundhog or the new truth?
I am anti-animal. I have this running joke at the station. Heck with that damn groundhog.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. We're spending 45 seconds on the groundhog on this news story when I need the weather time. We have severe thunderstorms knocking on our bed. We don't do that. But I always say it's like the heck with those varmints. And they pull out this Puxatawny Phil. They pull him out before it's sunrise. It's cloudy, and they got lights on him. Oh, of course he's going to see it. I don't know how they just. It's tradition. It's a tradition, and we love it.
Well, man, thank you so much for being here. We went way over.
I
appreciate your time. We appreciate your passion. We appreciate your expertise. And
thank you. But no, it's a blessing for me. It's a blessing for me.
We really appreciate being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Rob.